Let's bring in the Labor MP, Richard Marles, Shadow Minister too. Richard, good to see you. Good to see you. Thanks for your time this morning. So I will start with the Northern Rivers and the government's response to the flood crisis so far. You've been up there. What do you make of the response so far?
Well, I think the first thing to say is it's a really shocking sight to see, and one that I wasn't expecting, even given what I'd seen on the TV. I mean, you go through the streets of downtown Lismore, and there is rubbish piled high. Essentially, the whole of first floor Lismore was under water, and now there is a real crisis that is facing that town, as there is communities throughout the Northern Rivers, and the extent of it is profound. I mean, we're talking about the need now to be providing food, water, shelter, removal of debris, petrol, electricity, telecommunications, before you even get to the point of what happens with insurance, what happens with getting people and their businesses back on their feet. So the answer to the question is, what really struck me was the lack of a sense of leadership and coordination, and that has to be provided by the federal government. I mean, this is a disaster of national proportions that requires some national leadership to get people back on their feet. To do all of those things requires coordination, and that's what's not there at the moment.
Ahead of the Prime Minister's trip today, some details have been released. More of this will obviously come to light later on when the PM announces it. But on the face of it, Richard, there's going to be more funding support for reconstruction, businesses and families. Is that a good start?
Well, obviously, the more funding that is provided to people in this situation, the better. I mean, people definitely need those resources, and this is a time for government to be generous. It's also a time, I might say, I think, for insurance companies to be generous when they get to the business of assessing losses. But I'd also add that what really is required is some national coordination and leadership when it comes to the cleanup and when it comes to getting people back on their feet. So yes, money is critically important, but we need to see some architecture put in place when the Prime Minister visits there today, which actually provides some leadership in terms of dealing with this. I mean, Southern Cross University in Lismore has turned into a relief centre. I think there were about 700 people who were there, sleeping in the facilities there and being fed there. And it was almost the staff of the university who were left to provide the kind of coordination which really needs to be done at a federal level.
Have mitigation policies been exposed by this, or lack of?
I think they have. And
so what would you do differently if you win in a few months' time?
Yeah, well, the first thing here is that the Emergency Response Fund, which has been in place, has not had a cent spent from it. And it's there to deal
Scrooge-like.
Well, and it's there to deal with exactly this thing, disaster mitigation. I mean, we are going to see more extreme weather events. That's what all the predictions around climate change say, and that's what our experience has been in the last couple of years. We've obviously had a bushfire 2 years ago of an unprecedented scale, and now we're seeing flooding in this part of the world on an unprecedented scale. And what that means is that we need action on climate change, but we need to be thinking about how we put in place mitigation measures to protect communities from these sorts of events.
So just on that,
and not a cent has been spent.
So just on that disaster relief fund, so 200 million is allowed to be unlocked from that. How much would you like to increase that to?
Well, I mean, I think the starting point is that we actually need to see them spend some money. I mean, right now, all of that money has been sitting there accruing interest. That's great, but not a cent of it has been spent on what needs to be done. And that's actually protecting communities who are in places of danger from events of this kind. And that's really what needs to occur. And we do need to be clearly building resilience for communities who are exposed to floods, and certainly those in the Northern Rivers are an example of that. This is not the first time they've seen a flood, but it is, it's actually, it does tell the story, because these communities were last flooded in 2017. That's not that long ago. A lot of them are just getting back on their feet again, and we met a number of businesses in that situation. and then they're being hit again. So we know the communities that need help. We know the communities that need help in respect of bushfires, but we've actually got to start spending some money and providing that.